Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be taking part in this event which Ella, my old school friend, asked me to be a part of, and I'm extremely proud to be doing that today, especially as we have known each other for such a long time. It just feels great that she has entered into the world of art that she always talked about when we were 50 plus, and I have somehow managed to cling on to the world of acting and writing. From pretty much the same age as well, so it feels like a really proud moment. Also very pleased to be responding to Layla's extremely powerful work that is all around us now. And it's really nice to be able to respond to material that you actually want to respond to, which sometimes in my industry isn't always the case. Sometimes you just want to be like, yeah, well, you know. Yeah, so when I was asked to look and respond to Layla's work, it primarily had this amazing visual impact on me. But then when I looked below, so I received the image on email, I began to focus even more after I was visually very moved by it to the title, and very distressed as I began to sort of experience how much the title of the work's disposable bodies was evoking lots of thoughts about my life as an actor, which I suppose could sometimes be described as being a disposable body in a lot of ways. As a female actor working in the industry today, I think it is very easy to give into those feelings of being disposable. I have to work really hard, probably 100 times harder than some people, some of my peers, so that I root myself in projects that do just that, which is enable me to take some kind of root, which for me means to be nurtured and therefore ultimately grow in the profession that I have chosen. And it's sometimes crazy to think that as an artist in my particular field, whether I get a job or not can be broken down into whether I am the right age, whether I am the right race or the right gender, to name just some of the main headings under which I and my peers are scrutinised. And there are many, many, many subheadings. I mean, if you think about it, which I do a lot, I like to break it down in my head. It is essentially discrimination on a daily basis, if you look at it from that angle. And I suppose in a lot of ways you wouldn't really prescribe that sort of thing to your worst enemy. But I think what's led me to finding some way of making my acting active is by doing things like this and by choosing the material that I choose. And I knew that I had to activate myself in some way and not just be another body in the slipstream. My drama teacher as a kid used to always call me Zawe the activist, and I was sort of never really sure why, as I'd never really considered myself as political necessarily. I probably was, it's worth saying, about 11 at the time, so an activist at that point. I was like, yes, I am active, I'm 11. Most of my friends are. That's great, I'll take that on, that's fine. But from then, that age and up into my teens, I still sort of couldn't shake this notion that politics was maybe just for people who were much more intellectual than myself, people who could sort of ferociously debate about governmental politics at dinners, you know, or in the pub. And I never thought that maybe simply having my own micro-political world was relevant enough. I never felt it was sort of clever or savvy enough to just have really strong values and beliefs within myself that didn't necessarily whip up a debate over a pint, but was strong enough within me to affect absolutely every inch of work that I was beginning to carve out. I started acting age 6. I suppose I thought that maybe wanting to go into a profession like acting felt like it might be slightly redundant. I couldn't see how those beliefs and values I had would be able to translate and create change. The beliefs and values that very much related to positive changes for women in an industry that is notoriously famous for sidelining them. Awareness is one of my favourite words. I re-looked it up this morning just for its definition and kind of fell in love with it all over again. It simply means having knowledge of. But then one of its synonyms, consciousness, is also a word I think I have an even bigger love for. Consciousness defined as being an alert, cognitive state in which you are aware of yourself and your situation. And I think I love this word so much because it seems to be where all the roads lead back to regarding where my work goes as an actor and more recently as a writer for stage and screen, as the intro mentioned. And I think it also allows my personal politics to be more malleable. It feels imperative that my politics can change and move in the work that I do, mostly because it is work. It is a job, it pays my rent and enables me to eat, and if I became too rigid, I could potentially never take another job ever again, because as I said, there's always an element of discrimination and lying in wait in the acting profession. The writing is a slightly different story, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I think it's also really important for me to keep my politics malleable, because they have to move with the climate of my work, and my ethics have to sort of be reactive and firm at the same time. I mean, even in the first half of today, I feel like maybe there are even things that I've written in this which are already dated in my mind, or feel more prevalent, because you have to keep open in the work that I do, but at the same time, you have to find something that can really, really root you to some kind of belief, in my opinion. Otherwise, it's very easy to get taken along in a very sort of strange wind. And just on that note, I'm very absorbed in this book at the moment by Angela Davis, Women, Culture and Politics. This is what it looks like. Do judge this book by its cover. It's amazing. And I'm just going to quote something that really stood out in the introduction. The work of the political activist inevitably involves a certain tension between the requirement that positions be taken on current issues as they arise and the desire that one's contributions will somehow survive the ravages of time. In a sense, the most difficult challenge facing the activist is to respond fully to the needs of the moment, and to do so in such a way that the light one attempts to shine on the present will simultaneously illuminate the future. And that is the quote that I'm working out of at the moment as I go along my day-to-day in my work. And it also feels very important, this quote, because it was about creating resonance for the future. And I've worked really hard so far at navigating my career as an actor so that most of the time I would only be involved in projects that would move other female actors, specifically, I think, female actors of non-white ethnicity forward. My beautiful mother is Ugandan, she's there. My beautiful father, who was here, is English. And there was a time in my career where I felt so strongly that I was being over-sexualized, and then maybe the next day completely desexualized, and then on another occasion exoticized, and then on another separate occasion completely de-ethnitized, and all of those extremes felt as destructive and reductive as each other. I was never able to see a complex journey for the female roles within the material that I was auditioning for or reading, and this is material being commissioned and made by some of the most influential production companies and being aired by some of the most powerful and popular British broadcasters, revered internationally. There were, and often still are, peers of mine who are very, very happy to sell themselves short, in my opinion, and be another cog in that machine, I think. But it just seems so blissfully amazing for them. They seem so blissfully happy externally. It's a very happy existence, that blissful ignorance. And however, the more I was working and the more I was becoming part of this inner circle of actors working, 4% of actors are in work, and I am one of that 4%, and that feels very important. But I didn't want to respond to comments like, you're really lucky to be working, actually. That was never really enough for me, because that meant that you were just having to take absolutely everything that was on offer and compromise yourself a lot of the time. And almost the more that I saw, the more experience I got, almost in a way the unhappier I felt at the injustices that were very, very freely on offer. You know, I'm not going to pretend that I haven't played my very, very ample share of drug addicts and prostitutes, aggressive young females being sort of taunted and pushed into action by their male counterparts. I'm not going to deny that. I've played them and hopefully brought some kind of humanity to them in some way. But it's always that sense of awareness that's kept me really grounded and hopeful that by taking these roles and becoming more familiar as a face and a name in the industry, that could help me become more influential and even more of a spearhead for change that I feel very committed to. And I'm reminded of being on the set of my first ever feature film, the British classic, Centurions 2. It really is one of the 100 films you should see. I'm joking. And it's a film that was so much more commercial than I ever thought I would get a chance to be in. I played such gritty roles, see above, that I've just sort of described. That it was kind of like, wow, okay, amazing. I suddenly have this commercial market. This is brilliant, you know. It's wonderful being involved in gritty indie material, but at the same time, as we full well know, there's a limited audience for that material. So I was really excited. I became less excited when the part of the title of my role was a chav. The title was Leader of the Chavs. And it was a word that I was pretty much determined I wouldn't be associated with straight from the audition. And after I got the role, and I'm reminded this is my first ever feature film, I think I was maybe about 22, I insisted that I have a meeting with the producers to have the word chav removed from the title of the character and replaced with rude girl, which isn't perfect by any means, but I was at least able to research and trace it and justify that expression and that title as a word that has its roots in a celebratory cultural movement which is involved with music and identity, and something that was so positive at the time that it was being sort of bandied around. So I managed to root myself in that and have it completely changed. Who the hell did I think I was? But that felt really, really important, and it was a real benchmark for me in terms of proving to myself that I really was becoming the type of artist who would speak out for what I believed in, and against the unbelievably repetitive nature of this business to sell images and a language of social stigmatization. And so my recent work, which again was just mentioned, which is an independent docu-feature, which is a new type of hybrid film, which is a documentary and a dramatic feature film, called Dreams of a Life, feels like it was a real gift in terms of being able to just gather all of the facets of my personal politics, which I've been putting into practice in the acting profession. And it's the story of a woman called Joyce Carol Vincent, a woman whose father was Trinidadian and mother was Indian, living in London, who died alone in her flat in Wood Green and whose body wasn't discovered for 3 years. And this film had a female director and producer, both who worked tirelessly for 4 to 5 years to get the film financed, because no production company was willing to take a risk on a story with a complex and subtle female lead character, female lead black character. There were, I think, options for them to shorten that amount of time and financiering by making the story a little bit less called Dreams of a Life, more woman left to rot sort of films, or casting a huge name in the role which would guarantee the commercial success which all production companies seem to be so desperate for and are really dismissing much more important small stories because of that. So that felt like a really big moment for me to accept the role when I was offered it, to play Joyce Vincent, to bring her back to life in dramatic reconstructions, or as the film's title suggests, dreams of her life, interspliced with real testimonies from people who knew her in real life. And it just felt amazing to take a complex and subtle character that I kind of knew wasn't ever coming my way, and look after it and nurture it in the way that I knew that I had always wanted to do with a role. And of course it was frustrating to have my politics there in the back of my mind when I was creating a role. You kind of want to be able to absorb yourself as much in a role or a character as possible. But there were always these murmurs of politics and activism in my mind. And again, I think that's why that made it such a special role for me to take on, because usually you have to maybe just hide the politics in the back drawer and take it because you must eat. And so again, everyone felt the story wouldn't be able to penetrate the market because no one wants to hear about a woman who disappeared, a woman who fell through the cracks in society that the films these production companies usually produce try and distract you from. And so it was just great to be involved in something that felt true and was true, because it was based on a real life story and was so boundary pushing in terms of its content and form, and which gave a legacy to a woman who I think represents a whole sector of contemporary society, a whole sector of women unable to express the depth of their vulnerability because of potential stigmatization. And I think power and vulnerability have to go hand in hand. I think embracing the two of those makes for a much more healthy existence, for me anyway, because there's one thing kind of fearing showing your vulnerability or maybe inability to cope in today's society, and having all that strength that you're relying on sometimes imploding because you need an outlet for the other natural parts of you. So this leads me on to the work that I'm doing at the moment. I've been involved with a company called Clean Break for the past 3 years as their writer in residence. And they are a theatre company that use theatre education as a means to rehabilitate women who are ex-offenders at risk of offending because of drugs, mental health issues or domestic violence. And the work I do with them feels like my emotional, political, artistic touchstone, really. It's a small centre in Kentish Town that they operate out of, and I've very often driven straight from sets, either in London or elsewhere, where I've been filming something and gone straight in because it's a massive part of my priority and a massive part, I think, of how I keep this activism going. It really is the rock against which all the other waves in my career, I think, break, because it balances the professional world of theatre and the more personal world of charity and activism with scarce governmental funding. And it's a balance that I wish had struck more in this industry in which I work. It promotes work by female playwrights and female directors and production teams, and the centre itself is a female-only zone. I think we all feel there, not so much as to keep ourselves in, but to keep men out for the time that we are there working, as men are quite often a big part, or sometimes the centre of the crimes that the women have been involved with. So they work extremely tirelessly in reinventing work based around women's issues in the criminal justice system, but also trying to reinvent work based on women's issues completely. And I use women's issues as a phrase very lightly because you'd be surprised how many times I've had the response when I'm talking about the very detailed and powerful work that I do with Clean Break, and I've described it to someone and they said, "What is it about periods?" And as a joke, and I like a joke as much as the next person, I laugh many times a day, but that's usually when you'll find my face pretty stony cold and I don't even really need to engage further in that conversation or joke with that person. It's also an amazing company because they manage to constantly also dodge the rain of bullets that seems to be the press and its attitude to creative work involving women and women's issues, or female issue-based theatre. And as I go further, I suppose, along this journey, I'm involved with even more press as the work I do gets more attention, I suppose, and I'm currently trying to use that for all of the things that I've talked about here. But again, I'm suffering a very strange kind of backlash sometimes when I reread articles that I've maybe had interviews for. One specifically was an interview that I did about being a new up-and-coming writer. I was so excited. It was one of the first things that I'd done, which was about writing, and it came out about that long. First of all, it was fine. I said a lot, but they've obviously just condensed it down in a very clever way. And it sort of had a list of all the things I've sort of just described there. Again, very condensed. And then the last line was, "She lives alone in Stoke Newington." And I was, from that day on, very suspicious of the press and of trying to get a wider audience for the things that I think will help to create change for women in the industry. But it hasn't deterred me in any way. I feel like a very exciting time to bring all of the things that everyone's talking about today to some kind of forum where they'll hopefully be treated with respect that they deserve. Thank you.